Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Friday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The Lakers draft Bronny James. And meanwhile, let's get to know their first round pick, Dalton Knecht. We've got a scouting report next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday. No matter how or where you get your podcasts, this one's always free, never behind a paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 24,000 subscribers to the channel, all of whom are talking Bronny James and still walking on air, Andy, after the Wednesday night when the Lakers really by a lot of consensus got probably the steal of the first round, drafting Tennessee wing shooting guard / small forward Dalton Knecht. We really want a wing. We really need wings down here. So I'm calling him a wing. He's at least 6'5.5" without his shoes on. He'll be wearing shoes when he plays basketball. Close enough. So to get a scouting report, to get a better feel of Knecht, we've got Ric Butler. He covers Tennessee sports. He's a beat reporter at Rocky Top Insider. Rick, thanks so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be talking with you guys today. And obviously, there's a couple big players heading to Los Angeles, but we're talking about the first round pick here today.
And so, look, Andy and I make no bones about it. I happen to think that college basketball is the worst program on television. I'm not a huge fan, but we got to know who these guys are. You, on the other hand, had a chance to watch Dalton Knecht on a regular basis last year at Tennessee. First and foremost, what was your reaction? Like, where were you expecting him to be drafted based on what you saw, and what was your reaction when he slid all the way to 17?
Yeah, my anticipation heading into the draft was that he was going to be a lottery pick. That's what a lot of the analysts and that's what a lot of the pundits were talking about heading into it. I actually think that the day before the draft, ESPN had him all the way up to 6 to the Hornets. So maybe that was going to be a little bit on the fringe of the higher end, but I thought that maybe 14 would be the stopping point with the Trailblazers. He did work out for Portland multiple times during the offseason process. So I thought that was going to be it. But then you started to see him kind of continue to slide a little bit. And I think the biggest thing with his slide was his age, 23 years old. But maybe that's actually what the Lakers were. Maybe that was one of the appealing things to the Lakers, just about his sort of maturity coming in. Guys, this guy is a journeyman. He spent 2 years at Northeastern Junior College. Then he spent 2 years at Northern Colorado College. And then he finally made it over to the Power 5 at Tennessee for his lone year in college basketball. So he's a guy who's been a lot of different places. He's certainly not one of these 19-year-old developmental pieces. He's a guy who's 23 years old. He plays a little bit more like a young veteran, but I think he's the guy that the Lakers I think that was a tremendous pickup for the Lakers, and how he kind of fell to them at 17.
Yeah, the general consensus seems to be that age was an issue, just him being on the older side. A lot of these teams in the lottery would be looking for players with more upside potential, whereas you could look at Knecht as more of a finished product. Although what I think is interesting, I want to ask you about this, Rick, the idea that, as you mentioned, he was a journeyman who went from the JUCO scene to Northern Colorado to Tennessee, and he kept improving. Like his one season in the SEC, he basically took it over. How much upside, before we even get into his strengths, weaknesses as a player, how much upside do you think there actually still is there for Knecht to discover?
Yeah, that's a great question. I absolutely think there's upside to him, and I think that we can go back through his career and see some evidence as to why that is. First and foremost, Dalton Knecht is going to go into Los Angeles, and he doesn't have an ego to him. This is a guy who is humble about where he's been. He's humble about the journey that's gotten him to where he is now, but he's also very, very coachable. I remember hearing stories about during his visit to Tennessee, one of the biggest things that sold him quickly was that Rick Barnes and the coaching staff took him into the film room. They showed him his own highlights and his own tape, and they started critiquing them right there on the visit. Whether he was going to go to Tennessee or not, Tennessee's coaches started to, again, critique his game. That's that's one of the things that he loved the most. Now, with Tennessee's culture, I don't know, you just mentioned college basketball might not be your thing. I'll tell you, offense has not necessarily been Tennessee's thing under the Rick Barnes era at Tennessee. So when Dalton Knecht came in, there was a lot of pressure on him to be that offensive guy. But I think when he was here at Tennessee, he might have learned a little bit more about the defensive side. He certainly improved as a defender under Rick Barnes. But I think that you can look at that sort of improvement on the defensive end and see that, hey, man, when this guy links up with a guy like J.J. Redick, when he links up with all the talent and the experience that the Lakers have on their roster right now, I think he's going to be coachable in the exact same sort of way to really sort of hone in on that offensive side. He's already a scorer. He can already score in multiple different ways. But I think, again, that coaching that he's going to get at Los Angeles, he's proven to be a coachable guy in the past. I think that's one of the more advantageous aspects to his game.
I know Andy and I both have a lot of questions about the defense, because that was another thing. If there is a second thing that was like that contributed to a drop on the draft boards, it was probably that. I do want to let people know first that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So before we get to the D, though, you mentioned, I thought it was interesting, when he got to Tennessee, like, he was expected to carry a load. Like it was with the expectation that he would come out and be an offensive leader. What did it look like in terms of the sort of the day-to-day? What kinds of defenses was he seeing? How much attention was he seeing? Because one of the things that impressed me was that other than rebounding, really, his numbers against better competition got better at Tennessee than they were at Northern Colorado. So what was he doing? What were his responsibilities within the Tennessee offense? How did it operate?
Yeah, when Dalton Knecht was brought into Tennessee, he was brought in to be a focal point of a shooting offense, an offense that really wanted to step back out to the three-point line and use that more to their advantage. They needed a three-point shooter, and they found that with Dalton Knecht. Before we get to what he sort of saw in the defense, one of the things I think about what he's bringing to L.A. is that when he came to Tennessee last year, this was already a well-built college basketball team with veterans and older players on the roster. So, you know, he had to kind of find his way into and see how he was going to fit on a team that was already established with veterans. He was able to do that. So I think that also speaks to his maturity. But when games started rolling, and especially when SEC conference play started to happen, teams focused in on him. Team made him the primary offensive player for Tennessee, and they put their best defensive player on him. Most of the time, Tennessee saw man-to-man defense last year. Some teams would try to throw in a wrinkle with a little bit more zone. And to me, that was actually to kind of confuse Tennessee's other players a little bit more. I think that Dalton Knecht handled all that well. There was actually a time in the middle of the season where Tennessee was playing Auburn, and Rick Barnes spoke about it after the game. He actually spoke about a specific set that J.J. Redick had run, and he sort of implemented that in for Dalton Knecht. So there is a little bit of familiarity there.
When Redick was back at Duke, like he's running the same types of stuff. Because we kind of made the joke on our show for Thursday after the draft, that in some ways Redick drafted a more athletic version of himself.
Yeah, I think they do a lot of the similar things. And the biggest thing about Dalton Knecht's game when it comes to the offensive side is his ability to catch and shoot. Not that that's all he can do, but that's sort of what gave defenses the most trouble last year. He was able to come off of screens, kind of catch the ball on the outside, and then he had his choice. And for a lot of these SEC defenders, he was able to either get by them to the paint and go to the cup. He was able to pull up by the free throw line, or he was able to step back and hit a jump shot from behind the perimeter. So that was a lot of his game last year. He can handle the ball. He can drive to the basket. But when he came off of those screens, either looking for the roll man, looking for his own shot, that's when he gave defenses the most problems at Tennessee last year.
Let's get into a little bit more of the offense, but definitely look at the defensive side of the ball in the next segment, because to some degree, you know, the shooting, the offense, how he fits, how much he actually gets to play and be this NBA ready prospect is based on how well he holds up defensively. We'll get into that next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by Game Time. And some years ago, some friends of mine and I, we went to go see LL Cool J in LA, really last minute, the now defunct House of Blues. And we didn't know how to get tickets. So we ended up buying from a scalper, and scalper took us. These were fake tickets. And it was only through some totally random, totally unrepeatable luck that we managed to get into the building. But after that experience, I was like, never again. I don't want to do that, because buying tickets to your favorite event, it shouldn't be stressful. And that's why I love Game Time. It's a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy shows, and theater near you. And with killer deals on last-minute tickets and the best price guarantee, you can stop getting stressed over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun. They got flash deals, so you save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. And the Game Time guarantee means you always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, Game Time credits you 110% of the difference. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. So snag the tickets without the stress using Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
One more question for you, Rick, before we turn to defense. Like, one of the things that I think is intriguing about Knecht, having now become a Knecht expert based on a lot of watching of clips on Wednesday night on YouTube, I feel like I'm pretty well versed on him now. You mentioned that adaptability to going into a system, that was pretty well established. Tennessee was a very good team before Knecht got there. When you look at the ability to play off of LeBron James, to play off of Anthony Davis, the two things, obviously, the catch and shoot coming off screens, and then the ability to make the next pass after you come up, if the shot isn't the right play, to make the next pass. How well do you think he would, he'll be able to fill into a specific role that the Lakers might give him? And then in terms of those other two skill sets, that decision-making to come off the screen, shoot, put the ball on the floor, or make the pass, how effective is he there?
Yeah, well, I do think he's going to have an advantage when he, let's say he's on court with the Lakers next year. He's got himself a little bit of a role kind of notched out. I think that he's going to have an ability to be successful because he's not going to be the guy. So he is going to have those opportunities to maybe kind of be one of those guys that defenses tend to forget about because of the other superstars that LA has. So I really think that with the right schematics, with the right sort of game plan for the game, I think that he can be a guy who can be sneaky productive, who can get those points, who can get behind a defense, things like that. He's also a guy who can run around in transition. But we talk about his IQ. I think that's one of the things that I noticed first when he came to Tennessee. It's just that you can tell that this guy has been a lot of different places because he has that strong IQ. He knows what to do with the basketball. He knows how to get his teammates involved. But again, at Tennessee, he was that guy. So there were, more times than not, he was looking to get to the basket because maybe Tennessee was having a down game offensively. Maybe the other guys weren't going well as well. So he had a lot of pressure on his shoulders. So I do think that, not that he crumbled under that pressure, not that he didn't want that or anything. I just think that, he might have a little bit of an advantage when he's making those plays because he's not going to be that specific guy that guys are focusing on. And kind of like an NFL rookie quarterback, sometimes that's kind of where you have that advantage, right? Is you can have the other talented players on the roster. You can have your guy like Dalton Knecht doing specific things and specific game plans. And I think that can be an advantageous way to kind of get him on the court and figure out his offensive ability. But he's a guy that works well with the other players around him. Zakai Ziegler, Tennessee's point guard last year, was an all-SEC point guard, and those two guys worked in tandem very, very well. He also worked with Tennessee's big men well. So he's got good IQ, and I think that's one of the selling points to his game for sure.
You mentioned the defense improving over the course of the season. Where were the areas of the greatest weaknesses that he needed to shore up? And also, too, if he has certain areas defensively that you actually think have gone under the radar or a little bit underrated, what do you think they are?
Well, I'll say this. When Dalton Knecht first came to Tennessee, he was not a good defensive player, right? There were a lot of things to work on, and that was certainly Tennessee's biggest selling point to him was, here's what we believe we can do for you before the draft. Tennessee is a big defensive-heavy team. I think through the season, you saw him become better as a team defensive player. A lot of that was Tennessee's game plan, team, right? Passing off a screen, passing off a roll, something along those lines. So from that perspective, I do think he got better throughout the season. He still struggles with on-ball defense at times. I think he needs to work on his mobility a little bit more. He needs to get a little bit quicker to be able to handle some of those NBA wing players. But I do think that, ultimately, That's the knock on Dalton Knecht. If you're not talking about his age, if you're talking about things on the court, that's the knock on Dalton Knecht. And I think that's very fair. That's very reasonable, what everyone's been talking about. Maybe to a very small extent, it's been exaggerated because you need to have a weakness for a player like that, right? You need to have something to talk about on that frame. But I think that he's a little bit better of a defensive player than people give him credit for. Again, he was with a good team defense last year. So individually, I think that's where he might have struggled a little bit more, kind of, again, playing on that on-ball defense, getting through those screens, but he does have a lot of length that he can use to his advantage. Again, I think once he continues to work in an NBA strength and conditioning room, he improves his speed and mobility a little bit. That's where you can really see maybe a couple steps up on the defensive category.
That actually leads really well to the next thing I wanted to ask. He's a big guard, even by NBA standards, but if you're thinking of him as a wing, he's on the smaller side as a small forward. Do you think he could potentially guard up at all, or do you think he's going to need to guard twos, or if the speed allowed it, ones?
Yeah, I think especially early in his career, he's a guy that you pretty much stick with the position he's at. I don't think there's a ton of fluctuation. I think that could be something down the road, and not necessarily say that that's a knock on him right now, but that's just what we saw more from Tennessee last year and how I see the NBA, sort of how his journey to the NBA is progressing. Again, I think he's a guy who you pretty much don't have a ton of flexibility with, but I think he can get there with a little bit of work, and obviously a lot of work in the strength and conditioning room.
What do you see? You talk about the potential sort of upside there, Rick. Is it mostly on the defensive end? Are there things offensively where you think there's still room to grow, or is that kind of a complete? That part of it is pretty well full grown. Where do you see that upside?
Yeah, I don't see him being a defensive star in the NBA. I think that he can improve. I think that he can be sustainable for a team that's trying to make a playoff push, but I don't see that being his calling card to the NBA. Dalton Knecht, from the minute he got to Tennessee, he came out and said, my favorite player is Kevin Durant. Every single thing I do is based on Kevin Durant. He's kind of got that same tall, lean frame. He can make the jump shot. He's got a very high release to his shot. A lot of what he does is Kevin Durant-esque because that's who he's been modeling his game after. He's an offensive guy through and through. He wants to put the ball in the basket. He's not going to be a ball hog or anything like that, but he's an offensive-minded guy. He wants to score the ball. He wants to get to the basket, and he really kind of showed his infatuation with the three-point shot last year with a lot of three-pointer attempts and a lot made. I mean, there was a point in SEC play last year, a 3-game stretch against conference opponents, where he shot more than 60% from the perimeter. So he's an offensive guy. I think that's where his ceiling is. And I think that the defense can improve mainly just to keep him on par with sort of league average.
Last question I have for you, Rick. The Lakers, I think very much were going to take either Dalton Knecht or whoever was available for them at 17 with the idea that they were taking somebody who could enter the rotation now and get regular minutes as a rookie. Do you think Knecht will be able to do that?
I do. I think that Knecht is the kind of guy who can step in and get minutes next season for the Lakers. Again, just because of his maturity. I know that's kind of a cliche, and I know there's a lot of people who want to talk about maturity with the certain player that they cover or that they talk about, but it is a different kind of story with Dalton Knecht. He's not going to be a loud and a bolsterous guy. We had a lot of interviews with him and a lot of media appearances last year where he was a little bit more soft-spoken. He was a little bit more laid back, but once he gets on the court, it's a guy with swagger and energy. It can play up to that standard. I think that Dalton Knecht is the kind of guy who can step in and get those minutes again because of his maturity, because of the way he sees the court, because of the way he understands his role. Another impressive thing about his role at Tennessee last year, or about his job at Tennessee, is that he had a role and he flourished in it, but he also made the guys around him better. So again, I know this is college. I know we're comparing it to, the Western Conference with a team who's trying to make a playoff push. There's a very wide margin between that. But again, I saw traits last year that are not just college traits. I believe that they're traits that can carry over into the association.
He is Ric Butler. He covers Tennessee sports, beat reporter for Rocky Top Insider, and he has a lot more information about Dalton Knecht than we did, and we really appreciate you coming on and taking time.
Follow him on Twitter, Rick, RIC_Butler.
Hey, I know I don't want to add any more time to your show, but can I ask you guys a question that some Tennessee folks have been really wondering today?
Sure.
Do you mind?
Yeah.
So we know that Bronny James was just taken in the second round by the Lakers. Was that going to be inevitable no matter what? Or Does something like
It was going to be
Knecht's pick at
inevitable no
7
matter what. I don't need to hear the second part of the question.
Okay.
You're
It
right.
was going to be inevitable
That was
no matter
happening,
what.
regardless of what happened in the first round. Bronny at 55, if he was still there, was going to be with the Lakers. Those two things aren't related.
The only thing that might have made it not inevitable would be if Dalton Knecht had fallen all the way to 55. Then it might have actually been like no, seriously, LeBron, like we got to make a choice here.
Okay, that's what we were certainly figuring, but a lot of Tennessee folks are wondering if, hey, that might have given them a little bit more leeway to make that decision.
This was Thanos inevitable territory.
That's what it felt like. Yeah.
But that is actually something that we will get into in our next segment. We'll react to this scouting report and talk a little bit about Bronny James and what that means for the Lakers, getting all that next. Thanks again to Ric Butler and Bronny James next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle, level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whatever you are into, speed, power, style, all of the above, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what it is you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. And with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Our thanks again to Ric Butler. I feel very good now, just as good as I did before going into that. I mean, he basically confirmed what a lot of people have said, but with, some insights, Andy, in there about in terms of his adaptability, in terms of, contextually how he came into the Tennessee program and all that stuff that makes you feel like he'll be a good fit as a non-star offensive player in an offense like what the Lakers presumably will be running.
Yeah, the thing that jumped out to me the most that I thought was really exciting, at least potentially, about Dalton Knecht was the idea that even at 23, he may not be a finished product. Mm-hmm. Like the idea that there is some growth potential there. And, 23 is by NBA rookie standards old, but I do think sometimes we tend to write off guys too young in terms of who they're going to be down the road. Like I remember several years ago, you and I, Brian, did a piece for the Players Tribune working with Kyle Lowry. And in talking with him, we really got some insight into how he was a guy that went from, basically a journeyman, good but not great, kind of by his own admission, pain in the ass NBA player who was considered very difficult to coach, to a guy that's eventually going to have his number retired by the Raptors and has a decent shot of getting into the Hall of Fame. And it's not apples to apples in terms of Dalton Knecht and Lowry, but the point being, these guys are not always finished products at a certain age point. And I think we forget about that a lot, that there can be growth potential. I mean, even Vince Carter changed dramatically who he was as a player in his mid to late 30s. So the idea that, no, really, there might be a couple more steps of growth left in Knecht, that could make him not just like a steal for this season if he has a good rookie year. Like, he could look like a serious steal 5 years from now.
Well, I mean, look, if he's a really good rotation player, if he turns out to have a JJ Redick-like career, I've seen the comps to Wally Szczerbiak, who was probably at least at times of more of a if not a one on his team, a two, or a three.
He made an all-star team, I'm pretty sure. At the very least.
So I mean, like that may be a little more high end in terms of the role overall. But like I've seen those types of comps. If he has a career that's near either one of those guys, like that is a home run at 17. You're going to play a 10, 12 productive years in the league as the 17th pick. That is a home run. I also think people misinterpret upside to only mean potential to be an all-star, potential to be, and it doesn't have to be that. Like a guy presumably playing 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 more years, he's 23 years old. He's not, 43. And so, yeah, are certain things probably relatively locked in? Yes. Is he going to get significantly taller, significantly bigger? Like,
well, with his growth spurts never counted out because this guy has managed
generally
to go,
speaking, 23.
He's grown like a foot since high school.
Right.
So.
Since high school, though, generally speaking, at 23, you're done growing. But, is he going to add tons of bulk? No, but he'll add, 10, 12 pounds of muscle or whatever, just in an NBA weight room and stuff like that, or could, potentially. And, the upside doesn't have to be gets 20% better every year until he tops out as an all-star or something like that, or an all NBA player. Maybe it's he gets 5 or 6, and so 5% better, 10% better on a year-to-year basis, where his positioning on defense is something that gets better. Like, we heard Rick say, like, he's not going to be, a lockdown defender in the league. What he can be, though, is a good enough defender. Like, he can work his way, but building up to that is improvement. That is growth. That is upside. Adds a little bit more, a couple little things to his game, a couple different shots, a couple different things that he doesn't need now, needs down the road. That is upside. And so it's important to frame these things in ways that don't just mean all-star or like he is frozen in amber. Like, Austin Reeves, basically, same age, similar situations, played a full college career, has improved. Like, he has gotten better as a pro. Is he going to top out as an all-star? Probably not, but he did play for Team USA. That's pretty good. He's a really good player. And so, really good players, they'll go to Denver, look at what, the Celtics have, like their 5th best player. I mean, the Celtics are maybe a bad example because their 5th best player is like a borderline all-star.
Well, I mean, look at Malik Monk. Malik Monk went from a guy that 2 years ago had to play on a veteran's minimum, make good, bet on yourself. I mean, you know what? It's not even bet on yourself because he had no other offers. It was really, this is what you have to do, to being a guy that just got 4 years, $78 million from Sacramento. And again, it's not apples to apples because Malik Monk was a lottery pick. But the point being, Malik Monk went from looking like borderline bust to guy that can be an important part of a team with playoff aspirations. So again, you just never know.
So ultimately, I think, it's good to hear from somebody who was a lot closer to this than certainly we were, that it seems to still fit. It seems to make sense. It seems to be a guy who can be a good second unit scorer, who can also work around your starters, who doesn't need to be a star with the ball in his hand all the time to be successful. In fact, at the NBA level, probably better off without that. And who's certainly at least attentive enough and enough of a worker to make himself good enough defensively. Most of the league, one-on-one, really don't stay in front of it. That's why OG Anunoby is making $200 million. Like the ability to do that. Most guys can't. So I am very encouraged. Quick word on Bronny James. We did kind of a mini episode on this for people to go back to. But, if you missed that one, Lakers take him at 55 in the least surprising 55th pick in NBA history. I'm willing to venture a guess. I figured this would be the kind of thing that people were so prepared for that it wouldn't necessarily be hyper controversial when it finally happens. Man, was I wrong. People have reacted in very strong ways to this, both I think a lot of it is a Rorschach test on LeBron, whether you think LeBron has too much control over the organization or any of these things. But I mean, I get like, okay, yeah, the kid had there's some nepotism at play here, but I don't see, he was ranked.
The Lakers are an organization rooted in nepotism.
Yes, they are.
I'm just saying.
I mean, I this sort of ballpark where he was ranked on most of these boards. Our friend Mike Garcia, Canyon Driver, who was on previewing the draft for us on Wednesday, he had him as a borderline first round talent. So like, there are a lot of people who believe that, especially as a defensive specialist, he's got potential, and he was the 55th pick. So I don't have a problem with this.
This is my main thing. You know, we talked about a lot of other stuff in the show specifically devoted to Bronny, but my biggest thing is, do the Lakers actually think that he has potential as an NBA player? Like that he has a future in the league? You know, it's obviously something of a dice roll in the same way all second round picks are something of a dice roll, but do they actually believe that he has any type of real potential at all? If the answer is yes, then you know what? You're taking a flyer on a guy that ultimately would have been a flyer pick anyway, but the difference is it's some degree of cost of doing business with one of your franchise faces. Fine. It would bother me more if internally they really think Bronny has no business being in the NBA at all, and they're taking him just to make LeBron happy. It would bother me just because I feel like ultimately that sets up Bronny for potential ridicule. But also, too, I just feel like the assets that you have as a team are always limited. You never want to just toss them away, knowingly tossing them away. But if they think he has as reasonable a shot at an NBA future as pretty much anybody else that they would have taken at 55, then fine.
I will say this to your point. I agree with you about tossing away assets. The overwhelming statistical likelihood is whoever they pick at 55 would not have a meaningful NBA career.
But if they thought somebody else that they're leaving behind,
I didn't pay attention to who the last 5 picks of the draft were. Are those guys that the Lakers had ranked way higher on their draft board? Or did they figure anybody? We got 8 guys left. We know who we want with our two ways. At least a couple of these guys are going to be available for our two ways. The Lakers did sign a couple of people. I've never heard of them. We'll see what happens. If you think there is a 10% chance that LeBron could leave in free agency, spending the 55th pick to take that from 10% to 0% is a really good use of the 50.
Brian, we were told one has nothing to do with the other.
I am aware of that. But if there was a small, and you're talking to somebody who thinks there was very little chance, 10% is not a big chance, but it is a chance. It's
10% higher than 0.
It's 10% higher than 0. The answer now is 0. Like, LeBron is not going anywhere. And as much as people may like or dislike LeBron leaving would be kind of a disaster at this point. And so the Lakers took a guy who is not wildly out of line. He was a top high school prospect. He ran into real health trouble this year, which derailed his only college season. There are all kinds of politics of, people don't like the nepotism. This is the NBA. I think, wake up, like you said, the Lakers are built around this. But, assumptions that Bronny is being manipulated, all these other things, which I just think in the absence of evidence are wildly unfair to everybody involved. And so we'll see what happens. We'll see, summer league he's going to play. He is, see if he looks like the kind of guy who can be a defensive specialist in the league. That's probably his future. And at the very least, it's pretty cool that LeBron and his son get to play together. Like, if I'm LeBron and I, him, like, you got a guy who's marginal. We talked a lot about this on the, go listen to the special episode. But Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to see the show, hang out with over 24,000 subscribers. Thanks again to Ric Butler, and we will see everybody on Monday. And free agency, man, it's right here. This stuff just keeps on rolling. Everyone have a great weekend.